President Trump vowing to get tough on Cuba, citing Cuba's awful human rights record. But it's still an open question on what he will do about another country with a deplorable and even worse human rights record. I'm talking about Sudan and President Bashir. He has been Sudan's dictator since 1989, and not only is he a sponsor of international terrorism like the USS Cole bombing and giving Osama bin Laden safe haven, Bashir himself is a mass killer of his own people, having murdered hundreds of thousands in Darfur and the Nuba Mountains. Bashir also destroys farms, so those who manage to escape his murderous rampages have no food or nothing to eat. Sometimes the best they can do are leaves and bugs, and they hide in caves from Bashir's bombers over above. The U.S.? Well, it has had sanctions on Sudan as a state sponsor of terrorism, and Bashir is definitely feeling the pain from these sanctions. Some were lifted in January, but he now wants all sanctions lifted, and President Trump has until July 12th to decide whether those sanctions lifted in January should now be permanently lifted or reinstated, and whether to lift the remaining sanctions. Bashir just hired a law firm in Washington, D.C., Squire, Patton & Boggs. He's paying them $40,000 a month to lobby for him to get those sanctions gone. For years, former Virginia Congressman Frank Wolf has been fighting for the people of Sudan. Now he's back on the front lines, but this time without his former staffer, because that staffer is now working on the team lobbying for Sudan. I spoke with the congressman and Ryan Boyette, a humanitarian activist who has been living in the Nuba Mountains for 15 years with his wife and 2 children. And I started by asking Ryan, what is it like in Sudan now?
It's just the same, Greta. From the time that you entered Sudan, nothing has changed. There's still people today eating leaves in places that were just recently displaced, still living in caves.
Those are the planes. Those are the bombers. So they're dropping bombs.
Yeah, they're cargo planes that the government uses to drop bombs on the civilians.
Congressman, I think you were the first. You're the champion of the people of Sudan and all the horrible atrocities being done to them. You've been fighting for them. When was the first time you went to Sudan?
1989. And when genocide broke out in Darfur, Sam Brownback and I went to Darfur and came back, and President Bush called it genocide, Secretary Powell called it genocide, the Congress called it genocide.
All right, now fast forward to now. Last January, President Obama lifted some of the sanctions against Sudan, which is a sponsor of terrorism, state sponsor of terrorism, some of the sanctions. And now where are we in the status of sanctions?
The sanctions will be lifted if the Trump administration, well, it depends the Trump administration. Bashir has killed more people than ISIS and Boko Haram combined and Al-Qaeda. And don't forget, he's the one who invited bin Laden to come and live in Sudan from 92 to 94. To lift sanctions on a man like that is incredible. I beg the administration, in the interest of speaking out for human rights and religious freedom, you cannot lift the sanctions on Sudan.